gracious introduction, Oren. And you know, it's a pleasure, it's a privilege to be here with all of you. But first, just a quick calibration. If you are expecting that this is going to be an hour of guided meditation, you can do one of two things. Either you hightail it out of here as fast as possible, or we get Oren here, who's been meditating for 20 years, and lead you to the meditation. What this is going to be about is largely around connections, and connections at many different levels, personal and professional, organizational, perhaps global. And yet, at the very start of it, let's just have a quick show of hands. Again, a serious show of hands. How many of you are pretty regularly stressed out? Hold those hands up for a moment. How many of you are regularly around people who are pretty regularly stressed out? Okay, so just look around the room. It's just about 100%. It's as ubiquitous as we can imagine. And this happens in group after group around the country and beyond. And so, before I plunge into the short talk, the structure of it was going to be giving you a little taste of a practice, a transformative practice. And in this evidence-based world, we're going to measure the heck out of it. Just a little bit of a test, a pre-post evaluation. Next, we're going to go through exploring some of these connections together. And then I'll give you a little more of an extended practice that perhaps will be our gift to you to take with you so that any one of you can do this anytime, anywhere. Make sense? And then we'll hopefully have even a little bit of time for Q&A. So at the very beginning, as you know, most of you got a sheet of paper. If you haven't, please raise your hands. So let's just zero the pile. Get a pen, get a paper, put everything else down. And just let's take a quick look. All right? So the first thing to do with this piece of paper is you want to fold it in half. It's identical, top and bottom. So let's just have the top half exposed. All right? Everyone with me, more or less? And so there are three questions to answer. And so this is not about cogitating, contemplating, meditating on the three questions. It's like a quick snapshot of your present emotional and cognitive state. On a scale of 1 to 10, from stressed to relaxed. Stressed is 1, relaxed is 10. Where are you right now? How are you feeling? Just in this moment. Let's just capture that. Move on to the second question. Again, these are just quick jotting down. From distracted to focused. Where are you? Again, distracted is 1, focused is 10. And finally, the third question, from anxious to calm. And so as you get these three numbers down, a quick bit of math right after lunch, add them up. The number is going to be somewhere between 3 and 30, right? Is everyone with me? All right, when you're done with that, you flip the paper to the second half and tuck it away. And then let's do this. A little glimpse of a practice where you're trying to sit up a little bit tall. What is the idea with sitting up tall? That you're not slouching, you're not leaning back. We often do that. But for now, just a little comfortable, and yet that you're just spine neutral. Ears, shoulders, and hips lining up. You're not sitting stiff and taut, but relaxed, and yet with a little hint of a neutral spine. Ears, shoulders, hips simply lining up, one above the other. If you're comfortable enough, you can softly close your eyes. Otherwise, not to worry. I know the lights, at least at my end, with the spots pretty glaring, but see what's comfortable. If you want to keep your eyes softly closed, eyelids relaxed, mouth relaxed. Otherwise, you start to bring your attention to your own breathing. As you keep your chest and your abdomen and your belly relaxed, you start to feel not only the air in your lungs, but through the nose and back out, but perhaps that your chest and your abdomen are gently moving forward as you breathe in, gently heading back towards your spine as you breathe out. Just tuning in to the feeling of each breath, breath by breath, moment by moment. Continuing to feel each breath, moment by moment. Let's add a bit of rhythm to your breathing. Breathing in to a count of 4, and breathing out twice as slowly to a count of 8. At your own pace, a pace that's comfortable, a pace that's sustainable, simply breathing out twice as slowly as breathing in. feeling each breath moment by moment? Perhaps watching it as well. Are you breathing fast? Are you breathing shallow? Slow, deep, gentle, smooth. Perhaps feeling the feeling of each breath. Adding one more layer to your rhythmic breathing. If you're comfortable at hand, gently resting on your heart, and not resting on your abdomen. And even as you tune in to the movement of your thoracic cage as you're breathing, as you inhale, actively pushing your belly hand forward and out. A big, deep, balloon baby breath. And then as you're breathing out, actively pulling your belly in towards your spine, towards the back. Deep, rhythmic, belly breathing at your own pace. Adding one more layer to this little experience of mindfulness. Listening to the sound of this chime with your fullest attention until you can hear the very last trace of sound. Once again, with your fullest attention, one more time, as if coming fully into the present, gently letting go of past and future. Relax and breathe normally, slowly reaching for that piece of paper that you folded in half. The second half, the lower half exposed. And take a moment to answer the same three questions. Now, how are you feeling in this moment? On a scale of 1 to 10, stressed to relaxed, distracted to focused, anxious to calm. And let's do a quick total. And then, let's open up sheet of paper so you're seeing both scores. Let's do a quick show of hands. How many of you found that the total in the lower half is less than the total in the first half? Okay, couple hands. 3. How many of you felt that the scores were the same? No change. 2 hands, 3 or 4. So just as a double check, how many of you felt that the score in the second half was greater than the score in the first half? Okay, thanks. And so what just happened here? In a few moments of breathing, with a little bit of focus and attention, adding a bit of rhythm, perhaps a bit of abdominal movement, listening to a sound, something that seems to be deceptively simple, so accessible, doesn't cost a thing. Any one of us can do this anytime, anywhere. And yet, you moved towards a more desirable emotional and cognitive state. And so that's what we're going to look at in the next few moments, looking at the connections between contemplative or transformative practices, connections with creativity and innovation that are the very bedrock, the very foundation of Niroga. Looking at leadership, looking at personal sustainability, looking at maximal impact. Those are the kinds of things we'd like to explore over the next few minutes. And so let's take a look. As we talk about innovation, what are the essential qualities? If you want to think about this for just a moment with me, to be truly innovative, the very essence of what you guys are doing. What are the qualities, what are the behaviors that are vital, that are essential to ensure innovation? The incandescent bulb reminds us of Edison, perhaps. And persistence comes up. Right? Hundreds and hundreds of materials tested, rejected, that as they heat are still not becoming incandescent. And then finally, magic happens. But not just persistence, persistence in the midst of failure, apparent failure. Taking risks, curiosity, searching for and finding new patterns, new connections. It's the very essence of innovation. Now, innovation can't happen without creativity. The very survival of Heroku and its thriving depends on creativity. And so, what is the essence there? Again, behaviors, qualities. It's not enough to just go about saying, let's be creative. This doesn't work. So what is the essence there? Curiosity, of course. An openness, akin to the beginner's mind, getting out of not invented here, right? The NIH. With a sense of flexibility, clarity of purpose, humility, resilience. Also having fun. This continuous learning, willingness to change, risk-taking. You start to see commonalities between being innovative, the cutting edge of innovation, and really ensuring creativity. Makes sense? So then what happens? To be able to create a culture of creativity, you need leadership. What are the essential qualities, behaviors, of optimal leaders? Honesty and authenticity, certainly confidence, commitment to the mission, a positive attitude, creativity, intuition, fearlessness, a whole bunch of qualities that start to apply. But perhaps the interesting thing here is that there seem to be so many essential qualities and behaviors that are common to creativity and innovation and leadership. And so in this word cloud, words start popping out that we all know is essential. And of course, there's a leader in each one of us. It's not just about Todd or Arden or anyone else. And so this idea of inspiring a shared vision, enabling others to act, encouraging the heart, personal humility that is coupled with an indomitable professional will, all of these are essential to creating not just good companies, but great organizations. And now let's take a moment and address that little show of hands to start with, where just about every one of you is either pretty regularly stressed out or are around people who are. Stress isn't about to go away, is it? If you thought that your email boxes were overflowing, along comes Facebook. And if you thought Facebook wasn't bad enough, along comes Twitter. I mean, it just goes on, right? Complexity isn't dissolving away. It's not about reducing stress. Give that up. It's about managing it. It's about systematically building resilience to chronic stress. Because as we can see, stress, and as we will see, stress has everything to do in a variety of domains of our function. Let's just take the more obvious. We know that stress is a risk factor for just about every major chronic disease. That's 75% of our healthcare budget. That's trillions of dollars a year. Of course, stress gets quite a bad rap, right? And yet stress isn't all bad. Stress is essential as a forcing function for excellence, right? It's a survival mechanism. Fight or to flee. And so we need stress to not only survive, we need stress to operate at peak potential. And yet, what happens when stress becomes chronic? And there's too much stress for too long. Chronic diseases with hypertension, diabetes, or asthma, osteoporosis, arthritic, cancer, stroke, you name it. People are relating that to chronic stress. That's the easy part. Nobel Prize-winning research right in our neck of the woods at UCSF just a few years ago showed that stress affects us all the way down to our DNA. Accelerating aging. How many of you want to get old fast? And so there's a direct correlation between what's happening in the field of neuroscience and epigenetics and so on. It's basically saying we need to be looking at it seriously. Then, of course, there's the impact of stress on our emotions and on our behavior. And so perhaps, to understand what stress is really doing to us, let us take a moment and see what the latest research in neuroscience is saying about what stress does. It impacts 4 key areas. One is attention control. Second, emotion regulation, the ability to regulate our emotions. Third, coping strategies. And lastly, empathy. So just take a moment and reflect on what that means to our earlier conversation around creativity, intuition, and leadership. You start to see almost a one-to-one mapping of why many of the qualities and behaviors that are essential to sustain creativity, to drive innovation, to strive for peak and optimal leadership, are impacted simply by the impact of chronic stress on our brains. And so, of course, the obvious question that needs to be asked here is, what's an optimal solution to stress? What do we do? Especially given that stress isn't going away, it's only increasing with every passing day. And so what do we look for? The same neuroscience that's saying that chronic stress messes up our brains and affects all of these significant areas of function, whether it's holding attention, which is the very seat of creativity, of continuous learning and learning readiness, emotion regulation, the ability to have confidence, especially when things are falling apart, the idea of adding the coping strategies, the risk-taking, and under pressure, when things aren't quite going the way they perhaps were supposed to. And then empathy, encouraging the heart, taking others around with you, not only just having a vision, but having a shared vision, and then inspiring others to follow along with that shared vision. Those are essential. We know that. And so let's look at the same neuroscience, and it says, hey, what does it say? That the latest research in neuroscience is pointing to a solution. One word, mindfulness. Saying that mindfulness practices have been around for 5,000 years and more. Mitigate every single one of these effects of chronic stress on our brains. What else? Stress and trauma research has something more to add to this. And they're basically saying, we hold stress in our bodies. All of us know that, right? In our guts, in our shoulders, in our necks, especially in our sedentary lives. And so if you're going to hold stress in your body, in your tissues, in your muscles, in your fascia, you've got to use the body if you're going to manage your stress. Right? And so mindful movement is handed to us on a platter as an optimal response to chronic stress. What the heck is mindfulness? Quite a few definitions about it. I'm trying to keep it really simple. That you're aware of what you are doing just as you're doing it. Not before, not after. Just as you're doing it. Aware of what you're feeling, just as you're feeling it. Aware of what you're thinking, just as you're thinking it. It's not trivial, right? Just think about how much time we spend on past and future and how little time as the pendulum swings to the present. So the essence of mindfulness is present moment awareness. It's a skill. Absolutely can be systematically developed with regular practice. And so let's think about this practice systematically. We often call this practice transformative life skills. The idea that it's a skill, just like coding a computer is a skill. But what makes a skill? A life skill. And it's nudging us towards healthy behaviors, healthy lifestyle choices, ensuring our own sustainability and the sustainability of those around us. What makes a life skill transformative? When it nudges us towards developing those elusive, smoky, self-hyphenated words like self-control, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-awareness, self-mastery. And so we get to this idea of transformative practices that absolutely are skills, that also are life skills. What next? Neuroplasticity comes in interestingly. This is not just some foo-foo practice that gets us to be calm and relaxed. Neuroplasticity is saying that our brains continue to reorganize and rewire and reconnect from birth to death. An explosive period of development from 0 to 4, and then continuously adaptable, plastic, malleable, right through our entire lives, through adolescence and adulthood to beyond. And so there is hope in neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. Of course, neuroscientists will tell you that to be able to ensure that these 100 billion neurons with 1,000 connections each, we're talking about 100 trillion connections here, that neurons that fire together, wire together, we glibly say. The idea is that practice done regularly, with focus and with purpose, can absolutely rewire our brains and not only create new habits, but change old ones as well. There's also a process of vertical integration that is vital here to help us with regulation. The idea that our bodies are one part of this ecosystem. There's also the brain stem, the very oldest part of our brains that's basically holding the tools for survival. Fight, flight, freeze, and so on. Then comes the limbic system, the old mammalian brain, a couple 100 million years of evolution. And that's the seat of powerful emotion, fear, desire, and so on, as well as memory. And then comes the prefrontal cortex, the new mammalian brain, explosive growth in the last couple million years in mammals. And that, of course, the prefrontal cortex involved with reasoning and abstract concepts. And yet this process of integrating all of the four with the body means movement. The brainstem and the limbic system need to have a handle on regulating our emotions. So we use the breathing to be able to do that. It's a simple, beautiful investigation that happened ages ago, that if our mood affects our breathing, the question that these old researchers asked is, is it bidirectional? And the answer is yes. If your mood affects your breathing, and we all know that, absolutely you can take your breathing, change it, and affect the state of your mind. Beautiful, powerful handle of this respiratory system that seems so trivial, just like filling and emptying a balloon. It's so much more than that. And then you get to the prefrontal cortex. Through the breath, through the breathing practices, getting some semblance on our minds to be able to then impact reasoning. And if we are able to integrate vertically, up and down and bottom up, transformation happens as really, as palpably, as measurably as rewiring your brain. Looking at the system, we're all pretty familiar with this little loop It's actually a positive feedback loop, and we know the impacts of escalation in this feedback loop. The brain, out of all of our organs, is the most susceptible to our environments. These environmental stressors that I asked about earlier. And what happens? Impacts our behavior, and then of course our behavior impacts our environment, and you've got a merry feedback loop. And yet that's not the entire story. Behaviors aren't just our thoughts and words and actions. Behaviors are also practices. And there are absolutely these behaviors that are practices encapsulated in mindful movement that can indeed rewire the brain and spiral us towards self-mastery. And so we can look at it another way. This idea of transformative life skills that have everything to do with creativity, intuition, leadership, and so on. This is where we start with a handle on our stress, with tools that are optimal. What does that do? It leads to self-awareness. What is the essence of self-awareness? Perhaps the powerful difference between I'm stressed and I'm feeling stressed. Massive difference between the two, right? And yet when we do have a powerful emotion, I'm mad, I'm sad, we immediately identify, all of us, with it, as opposed to this ability to step back and create a little distinction between an emotion and the owner, or the witness of the emotion. That's powerful. What happens when you start to get established in self-awareness? That's the self-regulation, the emotional regulation piece. Where, out of all of our organs, is the most susceptible to our environments. These environmental stressors that I asked about earlier. And what happens? Impacts our behavior, and then of course our behavior impacts our environment, and we've got a merry feedback loop. And yet that's not the entire story. Behaviors aren't just our thoughts and words and actions. Behaviors are also practices. And there are absolutely these behaviors that are practices encapsulated in mindful movement that can indeed rewire the brain and spiral us towards self-mastery. And so we can look at it another way. This idea of transformative life skills that have everything to do with creativity, intuition, leadership, and so on. This is where we start with a handle on our stress, with tools that are optimal. What does that do? It leads to self-awareness. What is the essence of self-awareness? Perhaps the powerful difference between I'm stressed and I'm feeling stressed. Massive difference between the two, right? And yet when we do have a powerful emotion, I'm mad, I'm sad, we immediately identify, all of us, with it, as opposed to this ability to step back and create a little distinction between an emotion and the owner, or the witness of the emotion. That's powerful. What happens when you start to get established in self-awareness? That's the self-regulation, the emotional regulation piece. Where the essence of that is that you're acting rather than merely reacting to a situation. But it doesn't end there. All of these three elements are intrapersonal. It's an internal conversation. And yet, as you get established in self-awareness and self-regulation, it absolutely starts impacting those around us, leading towards healthy relationships. And so these transformative practices create this merry spiral, once again a positive feedback loop, that's incredibly powerful, that spirals us towards optimality. Many of you may be familiar with the 10-90 rule. Yeah? Stephen Covey and others have been looking at the behaviors of highly effective people and been talking about it. The idea essentially is that 10% or less of our lives is determined by what happens to us. And of course we know how little control we have of that. And that 90% of our lives or more is determined by how we respond. So how powerful is that? We're creating our world through our response. And you can systematically develop capability to regulate your response. And so this space, this infinitesimal point in time between a stimulus and a response, to be able to realize how you're going to respond, that of course is the essence of self-mastery. So now a quick question. You are familiar with the Bose atomic model, whirling electrons out of the core of the nucleus. The question really is, where is the power at the atom?
Connections. The bonds.
Is it in the whirling electrons, or is it in the tiny little nucleus? And so all of you know, that is the nucleus. You smash it apart, and you release an amazing amount of energy, right? So similarly, how does this relate to us as individuals? We have a core, and then we have our senses, sight and sound and taste and touch and so on, that's pulling our minds outwards with every interaction between our sense organs and objects of sense perception that are around us. And so the question is, where is our real power? Clearly not in our senses, right? And so we start to look further in towards our own essential cores. And so this question of who you really are needs to be looked at, even if we're trying to operate optimally. And so, neuroscientists have been saying that in addition to our 5 senses, we have a couple more. Bodily states comes up as kind of a 6th sense. What are those? If you are nervous, you've got to make a big presentation in front of key folks, what happens? A little bit of butterflies in the tummy, perhaps. If you're walking on a trail in Yosemite and you hear the rattle of a rattlesnake, and you have your child with you, perhaps you take a moment and you have that sense of fear and that need to protect, and perhaps you feel your heart pounding. So those are states, and yet they're not the usual 5. And so we tune in to bodily states as you start to look even closer. And you find there are mental states that are also there, kind of the 7th sense. Sad or mad. Happy. Relaxed, calm, stressed. On and on, the opposites, the duality of opposites. You say, all right, so we have these bodily states and mental states, and yet, if you go further in, and you are able to develop that little sense of separation between emotions and yourself, self-awareness, we touched upon that already. As you go further in, self-awareness leading to self-mastery, control over your responses. And then you get to the essence of who you really are. And if we're able to operate with self-awareness and self-mastery, imagine unleashing the potential, the amazing potential that's within each one of us. And then as we start to answer the next dimension of these connections, get a sense of who I am, and then the question comes, who are you? And if indeed you're looking at the connection between you and the other, your colleague perhaps, or your beloved, your child, what is that connection? Core to core, essence to essence. And as we start to explore what that connection, that fiber is connected with, then you start to see love and compassion perhaps is the essence of that connection. Because now it's not the color of their hair, or the accent, or whatever. It's something much deeper than that. That connecting, source to source. Empathy, forgiveness, gratitude, service, all of these qualities that start pouring out as an expression of that interconnectedness. And of course you take it a step further. And then as you start to create multiple connections in a strongly connected network, you start to get a hint of a grand generalization that was proposed thousands of years ago. The idea that we're perhaps one, only appearing as many. That indeed we're deeply interconnected and interdependent, just as the air that we're all breathing right now. And so perhaps the issue becomes a question of alignment. As we start to explore our personal trajectories, body, mind, and spirit, our professional trajectories, our organizational trajectories, impacting the world around us, start to think that quadruple bottom line, perhaps. personal, professional, organizational, global. And so there are ways and there are ways of doing. You're probably familiar with the story of a passerby walking down a road, three people, one after another, sitting down and breaking bricks and stones. So the passerby goes, "What are you doing?" The first person says, "I'm breaking bricks, stones." The second person says, "I'm making a wall." And the third person says, "I'm building a cathedral." And so one of us need to ask, what am I doing? Am I writing code? Am I building a product or a platform? Am I building an organization? Am I transforming lives? Am I changing the world? And once you find that your personal, professional, organizational trajectories are aligned, simply fly. You move from merely doing, so it'll cut out of the light of the essence of shifting from being to doing, back and forth in this continuum that we often talk about as effortless effort. In sports, we often talk about being in the zone, where an athlete is exhibiting peak performance for a certain period of time. Or Michael Jordan, perhaps, one after another, three-pointers and so on. It's towering above the competition. Ken Robinson, who's been exploring creativity for decades, talks about being in the element. When your abilities are ignited by the fire of your passion, and you start to reach towards creative activity, that engagement seems so simple and so accessible. Mihaly calls it being in the flow. It's all just different ways to think about that essential characteristic when you are just simply flying. And so the question here is, what makes you come alive? If Heroku is to come alive, you know that Heroku is only good as all of you. And if each one of you comes alive, something beautiful is about to happen here. I'll share a little bit of my story. Warren mentioned that I got a PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley, worked in Silicon Valley for many years. Largely in research and development, and spent some time flying around the world looking at company-wide, worldwide responsibilities around strategic planning and so on and so forth, working with some of the largest companies in the world. Coming from the technology side, predicting where the technology might be going in 5 years, when the customers didn't even have a clue what to really ask for, those kinds of things. And yet, my life and my work weren't particularly aligned. And so, there's a little sense of a lack of fulfillment, perhaps. But at the same time, my childhood, my upbringing, was an introspective practice. Yoga and breathing techniques and meditation since childhood, learning from my father, learning with monks and big mothers. And so even as I was engaged in Silicon Valley, I was looking at the tentacles of chronic stress all around me. Personal health, relationships, productivity, global competitiveness. And it was clear that the ravages of chronic stress ran deep. And yet, I knew of an optimal solution. When I first read trauma researchers talking about an optimal treatment response to trauma being an integrative approach to the way we process information. As an old computer scientist, I felt fabulous. The one at Berkeley was talking about that an integration of the kinesthetic, the emotional and the cognitive, that vertical integration that I talked about, that has everything to do with the way we deal with, optimally dealing with stress and trauma. And so what did I do? I stepped away from traditional computer science work about 10 years ago And in the search for alignment, knowing that my natural ability, aptitude, was towards introspection, concentration, meditation, and my passion was service, created a non-profit to take these transformative practices from corporate boardrooms to juvenile halls and jails around the country, training educators and mental health professionals, violence prevention officials, getting requests now from the Middle East to come and to transform their schools and to help with the refugee camps. And just endless opportunities that are pouring out, pulling us in so many different directions. And so, at this stage in my life where I get to do just what I want, it's a beautiful feeling to be able to completely be aligned in personal, professional, and more. And so, as you dream about your future and this turning point in your organization, imagining Heroku 3.0, where you have an ecosystem that you've created, where most of you have truly come alive, and where you're acting with self-mastery most of the time. What a powerful tipping point that would be. Thank you.
I heard a yes in the background. So I think we've got some time for questions. So if there are any questions, please let us know.
Hi, thanks. How do you reconcile sort of the global interconnectedness with competitiveness in marketplaces and this kind of combative nature of sort of capitalist interaction?
Yes. How do you reconcile interconnectedness with competition? You've probably seen heads of organizations talk about not just beating competition, but killing them. And yet, the essence here is perhaps coming to that realization that the opportunities aren't about a fixed pie and who gets which part of it, with the sense that that pie could grow. And all of a sudden, collaboration shows up to be significantly more powerful to take a company to the next level. So that's perhaps a way to think about it. And yet, of course, that requires some of those essential qualities that we talked about, where you don't feel limited because your vision is constricted. And how do you expand that as you start to pull in partners to create something much greater than what we have at this point? And yet that requires empathy. That requires, innovation and creativity and all of that we need as individuals and as a collective. Other thoughts? Yes, or question?
Hello. So thank you. I work remotely, and I find taking a walk does huge, amazing, wonderful things for my mood and everything. But I find I forget that taking walks does really good things for me. Do you have any recommendations on developing cues or more in terms of habit building of how to recognize when you do need to go through an exercise like this?
Yes. Basically, you know that this process of rewiring the brain requires regular practice. And so perhaps the first step is to realize that it's not about setting up goals. I'll keep out an hour a day for my self-care. So first, realistic, smart goals essentially, that are realistic, that are achievable and so on. Saying, all right, can I give it 5 minutes? Can I give it 10 minutes? Can I give it 15 minutes? Creating a list of self-care practices, whether it's taking a walk, whether it's listening to music, whether it's doing a little bit of yoga or meditation. Just having those things available, but then distilling the essence of that into just a few minutes that you can reach out whenever you want. That idea of anyone doing it anytime, anywhere. Just think about just being here. If you had a little reminder, either on your laptop or desktop, or else on your smartphone, and saying, it's time to take a little break. Perhaps you even have an app that pops up, and we're actually in the process of creating little mobile apps for stress management and so on and so forth. The idea that do a little bit of mindful movement, a little bit of breathing, a little bit of a centering practice, and see the impact. It's almost like, we know what happens if we don't brush our teeth regularly, right? Fat builds up and all kinds of chaos. And so we take it for granted. We have to brush our teeth every day. Last thing at night, first thing in the morning, and so on. So how can you distill the essence of a practice? And I gave you a little taste of that at the very outset. Can you do a little bit of it on a regular basis? Can you develop perhaps non-verbal cues where you're supporting each other in a regular practice? Can you start a staff meeting, an all-hands meeting with a little bit of practice and so on? So you create a culture that is supporting this practice. And we know the importance of community. So even as you tend to drop off the bandwagon on a regular practice, and regular practice to develop it, to deepen it, to sustain it is not trivial. We know that. And yet you can realize that you're not in this alone. And so that is up to each one of you to realize how you can fold that into your teams, not only into your lives, into your teams, into the entire company's culture. And that's part of the process. Yes?
I have a comment on the habit hacking and also a question. For habit hacking, it's been helpful for me to establish anchors, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner are like really easy ones. And so just like when after breakfast you may brush your teeth, or if you wait when you wake up you brush your teeth, after lunch go for a walk, and like it becomes just part of your routine. And also starting really small. There was one of these articles I was reading was really fascinating, where this guy wanted to be more active and work out and do this, and he lost sight of the overarching goal because he envisioned himself being really ripped. But instead decided to focus on just one really small goal, and that was just doing a push-up. And he set such a small goal of doing just one push-up that it would be ridiculous not to do it. Like, oh, should I do a push-up? Like, no, I'm just going to do one push-up. And then he built on that and did more than one push-up, and now he probably is ripped. My question is, the meditation exercise that we did, or the breathing exercise we did in the beginning, and your comment on mindfulness. Do you have any advice or starting points for those of us who like to practice that more regularly?
Help me out here. What is the question? How long?
What are resources?
Yeah. So that's a nice segue to something that we have for you. There's a little pile of one-pagers here, double-sided one-pagers. It's basically a little 15-minute practice. It's okay. So a little bit of what we often call in schools the ABCs, mindful action, breathing, centering. And so you can take a look at this. This is our gift to you, even just horizontal little strip lines of an action, a movement, an explanation of how to do it, how it connects with the breath, and then the benefits. You're taking even that, a little bit of shoulder movements, neck movements, just on a daily basis, folding that into your life, at home and at work. And then in terms of other resources that we have, we're building a series of videos. We've got a comprehensive curriculum that we put into schools and so on. 48 of these little lessons that help people, teachers, the mental health professionals, the social workers, all of them doing this, as well as the kids themselves. And so that is, we're turning that into multimedia lessons. So videos, as well as mobile applications. The whole idea is to bring this in. We've been talking with the requests by a couple companies to essentially take a 5-minute practice and document it in video, show the connections to creativity and innovation and leadership, and make that part of perhaps the intranet, where you can pass that around the net, and a new one gets created every week, and a little icon pops up every hour or two saying, time to chill out, take a break. So those are all kind of in the works. So,
And maybe, just as a follow-up, Todd, maybe what we can do is, I'm sure, I was looking for Celeste, but maybe after today we'll create mindfulness at Roku.com as well. That can share things inside.
Too many cameras.
Hi. So many of the issues and concerns that you discussed, stress, distraction, and so on, tend, at least for me, often very contextual. Whether it's work and office, or home and family, and community, and art, and so on. How do you think that? Can you talk a little bit about how mindfulness can help us to manage or integrate or connect those contexts in a healthy way?
yes, part of it again is looking at the practice that is there in that just deceptively simple movements. Taking bits of what we call mindful action, integrating that with mindful breathing, and then involving awareness to fold that in. So that kind of the ABCs. But the idea is that it's an anchoring in the C, in centering practice, that then connects with the breath and emerges an A. That would be one way to perhaps fold it into your own life and bring it into work. Can I answer your question?
Not quite, but I'll talk.
Not quite. Catch me after. As I'm getting old and decrepit, my hearing is largely going as well. So help me out. Lauren, help me out with the questions.
You asked us to raise our hands to show how many of us are feeling stressed or regularly feel stressed, and then how often are we around people who are stressed.
Yes.
So how do you, especially in the workplace, maintain ear-centeredness when you're around other people who are stressed?
Yes. So there are a couple of things that happen. First of all, this question of vicarious or secondary trauma and stress. So, stress, chronic stress, toxic stress, traumatic stress with a primary or secondary post-traumatic stress. All of this, the common operative word here is stress. And so what happens here with stress with those around us, there's a process that's basically just like, imbibing secondhand smoke. And so just as really, as palpably, you're taking in smoke, someone is smoking around you. If you're around people dealing with stress and trauma, you are absolutely taking that in. Neuroscience talks about mirror neurons, the insula and so on and so on, kind of the seat of empathy. That's saying if you do something predictable, just as your neural networks are firing, mine are too. And so that's the very essence of the trajectory of empathy. And so if you are, especially caregivers, yes, whether it's parents, whether social workers, mental professionals, this is a major problem. School teachers, taking that on and then not doing the stress management or self-care, they're healing from vicarious trauma. And you get into that tailspin of impacts on attention control and emotional regulation and so on. So it's a process. And the thing is, this also points out perhaps 4 levels of the practice. You create a simple little practice where you're doing it on your own regularly. Then what happens is you can bring it into work and you can bring it into interactions with others, where even though they don't know about it, you are continuing the practice. Like mindful breathing. Nobody needs to even know you're doing it. Then the 3rd level of practice is where you are able to lead another in the practice. You're doing it together. And then the 4th level is you've given them some tools that they are able to do it on their own. And that's when something beautiful happens. It's a question of that tipping point with enough critical mass. Can most of us do it most of the time? Literally dissolving away your stress on a regular basis, just like brushing your teeth regularly. Distilling the practice down to just a few moments. It's not about getting a yoga mat and fancy yoga clothes and planning for an hour in a yoga class, where you can really do it anytime, anywhere, just in moments. Neuroscientists are showing, I was just at a huge conference on brain development and learning in Vancouver, and one of the top neuroscientists in the world were there, we were presenting our work. And so one of them mentioned that they've been measuring in the lab that even 2 or 3 minutes of regular practice is profoundly changing the way the brain is wired. So it's showing up in functional neurobiology.
Hi. You talked a lot about neuroplasticity and the extent to which the brain can rewire itself to accommodate, a reduction in stress overall. But I'm curious how you see, for example, nutrition fitting into.
Curious about nutrition. Yes.
I would imagine that that would have a pretty big effect on your brain's ability to rewire and
Yes,
how
absolutely.
quickly now.
Yes, the nutrition is critical as well in multiple ways. And I think what this really brings up is that we want to look at all of this as part of a package of lifestyle therapeutics. That what you're eating, who has even cooked it, where it's been grown, other than just merely eating organic and so on and so forth, a little bit more than that, is that absolutely affects us all the way down to the cellular level, what to speak of just the nervous system. And so there is that impact. What are you eating? When are you eating? How much are you eating? And so there's also that element of emotion control, emotion regulation, that's self-control, that's also part of this. That nudges us towards a healthy lifestyle. That's, you know, what is not just pleasant in the short term, but what is helpful, what is good in the long term. And so there is nutrition, there is, you know, getting enough rest and relaxation, you know, doing the physical activity that we need for the cardiovascular system and more. So strength, endurance, flexibility, balance. These are elements that we need kinesthetically. And then, of course, you're talking about what am I doing about my vertical integration? How am I dealing with this ability to be more of a witness, and so that I can indeed act with self-mastery? So these are all components of, you know, an enabled optimal system.
I find myself that I need to be, I guess I deal very badly with negativity in my life. And my solution to that is normally to separate myself from the negativity. And I'm wondering if that is, if you feel like that's an improper solution, like either physically or electronically distancing myself from negative situations, as opposed to learning how to be more resilient towards them.
So, thinking about, you know, this question around negativity, one of the processes perhaps goes back to that little heading towards our innermost selves. And so when indeed negativity arises, and whether it's, you know, leading in due course to, you know, depression or mental health issues, whatever that is, the question, a couple of ways in which the practice tends to help. One is, first, you know, a counter thought. Who am I? That foundational question says, I'm not merely, you know, who I think I am. I'm not just my body. I'm not just my emotions, my thoughts, my bright ideas. I'm not just my intellect. Something more. Who is that? And so as I start to tune into that, the promise is clear. It's a universal promise that the essence in us is all good, all auspicious. We may be acting in aberrant ways. We may not be feeling that connection, but that doesn't still take away from that essential truth. And so the idea is, how do I slowly connect to that? There could be all kinds of reasons why I feel that I'm not fully integrated, why I don't feel, you know, my enormous potential. It could be, you know, early childhood trauma. I'm not saying that has anything to do with your upbringing at all. But it could be, you know, the stresses in our environment growing up. It could be, you know, so many different factors in the environment. But the idea is that there are ways to deal with that, to cope with that, through an integrated practice, to start to really connect to our, you know, essential strength, which is, you know, not just like, you know, you build core strength to build up, you know, a solid abdominal core, so you have good posture. You know, the metaphor there is that how am I really at my core? Am I connecting to all of my strengths and my capabilities? And that's a way by which regular practice, that's an integrated practice, absolutely helps establish those connections.
Well, dude, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.